The scent of blood never truly fades. It lingers in the stone walls of Cashtai's castle like a persistent whisper, a crimson memory of the most prolific female serial killer in history. Here, where nightmare and reality intertwined, Lady Elizabeth Bathory would transform from a noble Hungarian countess into a legend that would haunt generations. Born in 1560 to one of Hungary's most powerful aristocratic families, Elizabeth was not merely a product of her time, but a psychological enigma that would defy the constraints of 16th century nobility. From her earliest years, she was surrounded by a world of extraordinary violence, a landscape where power was measured in blood and nobility was a thin veneer covering deeper, more savage impulses. Her family tree was a twisted labyrinth of political intrigue and genetic complexity. Nobility in the Hungarian kingdoms was not just about lineage, but about survival. She learned these lessons early, absorbing them like dark poetry into her very being. Marriage to Ferenc Nadasdy at 15 was not a romantic union, but a strategic alliance that would give her unprecedented power. Nadasdy was a warrior known as the Black Knight, a man whose military campaigns were as brutal as they were legendary. Together, they created a partnership that seemed to exist beyond the normal boundaries of human interaction, a union built on mutual understanding of power's most primal manifestations. The castle at Cashtai became more than a residence. It was a theater of psychological transformation, a place where Elizabeth would explore the darkest corners of human vulnerability. Servants were not just employees, but potential victims in a complex game of control that suggested something far more intricate than simple sadism. Historians and psychologists have long debated Elizabeth's true nature. Was she a product of her time, a noblewoman whose absolute power corrupted absolutely? Or was she something more complex, a woman whose psychological landscape was so fundamentally different that conventional moral understanding failed to capture her essence? Her alleged crimes were not random acts of violence, but a systematic approach to human manipulation. Young women were brought to the castle, promised work, only to become subjects in Elizabeth's increasingly elaborate psychological experiments. Torture was not just physical, but a form of performance art that spoke to deeper, more disturbing psychological impulses. The stories of her bathing in virgin blood, supposedly to maintain her youth, have been both sensationalized and scrutinized. Modern researchers suggest this might have been more than mere superstition. Elizabeth understood something profound about power, that it was psychological before it was physical, that true control meant breaking not just bodies, but spirits. Her eventual downfall came not from a sudden moral awakening, but from political maneuvering. In a world of aristocratic intrigue, Elizabeth had finally overreached. The number of her victims, estimated between 40 and 650, had become impossible to ignore. Fascinating psychological profiles suggest Elizabeth might have been suffering from complex mental health conditions long before such concepts existed. Borderline personality disorder, narcissistic tendencies, and potential hereditary mental illness all offer potential explanations for her behavior. But these clinical descriptions feel inadequate. They cannot capture the profound psychological complexity of a woman who existed so far beyond conventional understanding. Eventually, she was punished for her crimes, and the punishment was unique. She was walled up in her own castle, confined to a series of rooms where she would spend her final years. It was a punishment that seemed almost metaphorical. The woman who had created her own psychological prison was now physically imprisoned, her power stripped away layer by layer. The legends that emerged after her death transformed Elizabeth from a human being into a mythological figure. She became a vampire before vampires existed in popular imagination, a creature who represented something more profound than mere murder, a representation of aristocratic power's most terrifying potential. Modern psychological research suggests that Elizabeth was not an aberration, but a complex product of her time. Absolute power, combined with potential undiagnosed mental health conditions and a culture that viewed lower-class lives as disposable, created a perfect storm of psychological destruction. Her legacy is not simple. She is simultaneously a monster and a victim, a product of a system that gave absolute power to those who were least equipped to handle it. The walls of Cactice Castle still whisper her story, a narrative more complex than simple murder, more profound than mere historical footnote. In the end, Elizabeth Bathory represents something fundamental about human potential, the terrifying capacity for destruction that exists when psychological complexity meets absolute power. She is a reminder that the line between civilization and savagery is far thinner than we would like to believe. The blood may have dried centuries ago, but the story remains a crimson thread, weaving through the fabric of human understanding, challenging everything we think we know about power, psychology, and the darkest corners of human potential.